How are we doing, folks? Your host Moose here on the Pitt Panthers Football Network as we welcome you to our Season 2 kind of recap show. Your Pitt Panthers, of course, coming off a Music City Bowl loss 32-29 to the Texas A&M Aggies. Not the best effort by the Panthers, but their pass defense showed some improvement. Hubenak kind of nickel and dimed them to death with those out routes and things like that, but they had a bend but not break outlook, gave up 6 field goals in this one. So that was really the tough part. Only 2 touchdowns for A&M, but 6 field goals throughout the course of the affair. The Panthers nearly came back from a huge 23-7 halftime deficit with a Kenny Pickett comeback. He came in, relieved Ben DiNucci in the second half of the football game, who had struggled early, and Pickett came in, was very successful, passed well. I wouldn't say spectacularly, but he was did very well, was very consistent. He kept the chains moving, allowed the Panthers to make some plays and to come back, and they nearly pulled off the victory. So the Panthers may have a bit of a controversy on their hands. We'll have to see. You take a look at the comparison between the two players. DiNucci played the first half, 3 completions on 11 attempts for 15 yards. Kenny Pickett played the second half, 11 of 17 for 128 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, you can't base your opinions on these quarterbacks on one half of football that they played here, but DiNucci lately has really just been kind of trending downward. They gave Pickett an opportunity, and he ran with it, so it remains to be seen what's going to happen going into next year, but presents good vibes, at least, for the Panthers for their quarterback situation, as, the struggles with DiNucci of late had kind of trended downward. Pickett came in. He showed that he can do something similar to DiNucci. He still ran for 58 yards on the ground. Only took 1 sack, so he probably would have had over 60 yards. Ran for a touchdown as well. Had a 14-yard carry, couple of good longs, ran the read option successfully. So Pickett showed that he can do a lot of the same things that DiNucci can do. He maybe is just a bit below him on the top end speed, but he had a great performance. Jester Weah, in his final matchup as a Pitt Panther, 6 catches for 40 yards and a couple of touchdowns, so at least he goes out with a solid game. Darren Hall, running the ball, looked very good for the Panthers, 152 yards on the ground on 18 carries and a touchdown, so definitely some bright spots for the Panthers. A couple youngsters getting into the game. Aaron Matthews, a couple of catches. Defensively, you had the likes of Sean Wolfgang, defensive end, freshman, Jason Jordan, outside linebacker freshman, each with a sack. You had a couple of tackles from Barry Jenkins II, another freshman, and then guys that are returning. Paris Ford, 8 tackles in this matchup. DeMar Hamlin, 9 tackles and a tackle for a loss. You can see Wolfgang, Jordan, Dwayne Hendricks, all guys that should be returning next year, each with sacks. Idowu, 7 tackles. So all the guys that really had big performances for the Panthers should be returning for next season. Of course, the one disappointment, they lose by a field goal. Their freshman kicker, Jay Bump, who had been 18 of 20 on field goals, but we know he doesn't have the strongest leg in the country, unfortunately came up just short on a 47-yard field goal attempt, and that was the difference in the game if you hindsight's 20/20 and you look back at it. So good, solid performance from the Panthers all around. The one thing they'll want to get better on is just their pass defense, again, was solid. It was better than a few of the games they've had recently, giving up almost 400 yards against Miami, almost 400 yards against North Carolina. So it was a step in the right direction, but A&M still was able to just kind of dink and dunk them down the field over and over again. They only had to punt, I think, twice in the entirety of the game, and so the Panthers will want to improve there and create as much havoc as they can. But overall, the Panthers have a lot to be proud of, the way they finished out the season, the way they battled back in the second half, and it's at least going to give them, in spite of the loss, a little bit of momentum going here into spring practice, going into the offseason, and moving towards next season, though it does open up a little bit of uncertainty on the offensive side of the ball, especially with some roster turnover to come, with some people expected to leave to the NFL draft, some transfers expected to occur, and things of that nature. The big question mark is going to be coming forward at quarterback. But as you take a look, we have the bowl results from this past season flicking by, so if you want to see your favorite school, feel free to pause the video at any point in time and you can take a look at how they've done. We'll talk about a few of the BCS games that took place throughout bowl week. So some big matchups, some big games. Of course, in the Rose Bowl, Notre Dame, UCLA, a huge matchup. DeShone Kizer versus Josh Rosen, and in that one, UCLA nearly comes from behind. They score a late fourth quarter touchdown. They're unable to convert on the 2-point conversion with 2:35 left. They fail to recover the onside kick, and Notre Dame is able to run out the clock. DeShone Kizer with 4 touchdowns in that one in Notre Dame's victory. Penn State with a 31-24 victory over TCU in a battle of a couple 10-2 teams there. TCU, Big 12 champions. Penn State, Big 10 at large. Great performance. Saquon Barkley has a touchdown. Trace McSorley tosses for a couple touchdowns. Miles Sanders. So it remains to be seen if Barkley will want to go to the draft. You would expect him to, but if he comes back hoping for a national championship, that would be just incredible sight to see. Brad Kaya, 5 touchdown performance, 4 passing, 1 rushing in a 38-14 blowout of SEC champion Tennessee. So Miami finishes off on a very strong note. No one's going to question their ability this season. And then the game everybody was really interested in, Arkansas State, came in undefeated, wanted to make claims that if they win out, maybe they should have a share of the national title. They don't have to worry about that anymore. 90 passing yards, only 250 total yards of offense, and they got obliterated 41-0 by Texas. And finally, our national championship game, Clemson goes back-to-back, 34-21. Deshaun Watson goes out on his college career with a Heisman Trophy now and 2 NCAA championships in the Battle of the Unbeatens. Clemson wins 34-21, the battle of the last 2 Heisman winners, in fact, Watson and J.T. Barrett. Deshaun Watson comes out on top, and it was even a bigger victory. Ohio State had kind of a touchdown in garbage time that made it look even closer than it really was. An unbelievable performance by Clemson, and they come away with the national championship. And that means the end of season rankings. Clemson, your unanimous number 1, the only unbeaten left in the entire country, with Ohio State and Arkansas State both losing in bowl week. Penn State, unbelievably, in the coaches poll, jumps up to number 2, leapfrogging even Ohio State, who beat them and who was in the national championship game, who only has 1 loss. Penn State with 2. They've jumped above Ohio State in the coaches poll, which is unbelievable, but you can take a look at the top 25 as it stands right now. The media poll maybe makes a little bit more sense. Miami, with their dominating performance, jumps up to 3. Texas, their dominating performance goes to 2. Ohio State still falls to 5 somehow, but that's your ranking. So with that said, with your national picture out of the way, we're going to recap your Pitt Panthers. We're going to take a look at how the season finished out for them, the player statistics for this season, and kind of an outlook going into spring practice and into next season. So, of course, the Panthers open the season a 33-22. This is your recap for everybody that is, joining us here. 33-22 victory, and this was where the quarterback duel originally started. It was Ben DiNucci, Thomas McVitie, alternating series to start off. McVitie went 0 for 6 in his pass attempts, never even completed a pass. DiNucci took things by the reins and started every game the rest of the year. 18 of 27, 217 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. He wasn't even the biggest story in the day. Quadri Henderson, 43 rushing yards, 47 receiving yards, 198 return yards, and a touchdown in that victory. And then the Panthers went away to Happy Valley to take on Penn State and ended up pulling an unbelievable victory in a ranked matchup, 20-17. Dwayne Hendricks had his real coming out party, 8 tackles, 6 for a loss, and 4 sacks in that rivalry game victory. Panthers then came back home, took on Oklahoma State in triple overtime. They came away with a win, 58-55. Quadri Olison led the way, 155 yards on the ground and 3 touchdowns. Ben DiNucci actually had the winning touchdown, running the ball into the end zone in the third overtime, and he had a solid game. 278 yards passing, 25 of 36, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, but he did have 2 rushing TDs as well in that victory. In the next game, he had arguably his biggest game of the season, 52-10 victory against Miami of Ohio at home. DiNucci passed for 321 yards on 25 of 37 passing and 4 touchdowns in that win. So that was where you're looking at Ben DiNucci thinking, this is the Panthers quarterback of the future. But then the Panthers are brought back down to earth, losing away in Death Valley to eventual national champions Clemson, 38-20. DiNucci did pass for 300 yards, but a lot of those came in garbage time. The Panthers' big star was Olison again with a 133-yard performance and a touchdown. Did very, very well for the Panthers, but they just weren't able to match up with the national champions this year after beating them in the regular season last year. The Panthers then came back home, took on Boston College, won 31-28, 7 sacks defensively, so it was a great game for the Panthers defense. They did give up a decent number of rushing yards, and this was DiNucci's arguably most consistent and efficient performance of the season. 24 of 30 passing, 225, 2 touchdowns, and a rushing TD. But then things fall back down to earth next week. The Panthers away at Virginia Tech lose 28-20. Jordan Whitehead with a great performance. Couple tackles for a loss, 7 tackles, forced a fumble, and had a sack, but it wasn't enough for the Panthers to come away victorious in this one. They did return back home against the other Commonwealth school, Virginia, UVA, and the Panthers obliterated them. 3 defensive touchdowns, a DeMar Hamlin pick 6, Jordan Whitehead with 2 touchdowns, 1 on each side of the ball. He had a pick 6, and he had a 37-yard rushing touchdown. Dwayne Hendricks also recovered a fumble for a touchdown, and this is where we saw the first kind of outburst of Darren Hall to give us a 2-pronged attack at running back, 121 yards and a pair of touchdowns for the junior running back there. Panthers kept things up going away to the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets, and they did come away with a victory in spite of a really subpar performance. Ben DiNucci really struggled. 3 interceptions in this performance. Did have a passing touchdown, but 3 picks. Quadri Olson, Darren Hall, and DiNucci himself, though, did each have 50-plus yards on the ground themselves. The Panthers had 300 yards rushing. DiNucci had 56. Hall had 64. Olson had 100 yards all on the ground. Whitehead had a rushing touchdown as well, so seeing him do great work on both sides of the ball. He had 9 tackles and a rushing TD as the Panthers were able to fight through and get a victory. They came back home, took on the Duke Blue Devils in a big matchup. In this one, they really coasted to victory. Darren Hall had an unbelievable outburst, 210 yards and a pair of touchdowns on the ground. So this was Darren Hall's biggest game of the season. He was fantastic. And the Panthers really just coasted in this one. They didn't have to do too much. But then they run into Chapel Hill, a place they've notoriously had so many struggles, and they fall to North Carolina, who was 4-6 at that point. North Carolina went on a tear to finish the season, but the Panthers lost to them 31-24. DiNucci, a pair of interceptions, really struggled. The only thing that kept the Panthers in the game was they had 3 defensive touchdowns. Paris Ford had a pick 6, DeMar Hamlin had a pick 6, and Salim Brightwell recovered a fumble for a touchdown to keep the Panthers in the game. They then nearly pulled off an upset coming back home, taking on Miami, who was number 3 in the country at the time. The Panthers fell down 24-0, fought back to tie the game 27-27 before giving up the winning touchdown with just 12 seconds left to play. And this was Quadri Henderson's game to shine. 302 return yards, including a kick return touchdown, and he even had a huge return that gave the Panthers one shot at it wasn't even a Hail Mary, it was like a 35-yard throw to the end zone, fell incomplete, and the Panthers fell in this one 34-27. Darren Hall and Quadri Olson, each with a rushing touchdown. DiNucci, not a great performance, had no touchdowns and an interception on the day, but great resiliency from the Panthers, as you seem to see that through the final 2 games, taking on a couple of solid teams. Against Miami, Panthers showed fantastic resiliency. And in their bowl game, the Music City Bowl, where they lost 32-29 to Texas A&M, again, resiliency. DiNucci struggled, saw himself removed from that game. Kenny Pickett came in, took the bull by the horns, and nearly led the Panthers back to victory. Of course, their final Hail Mary attempt fell short, but it was an unbelievable comeback. Pickett, 128 yards through the air, a couple of touchdowns, 58 yards on the ground and a touchdown. Darren Hall, another great statement performance for him, 152 yards and a touchdown. So the Panthers, 2 running backs that showed flashes of brilliance this year, 2 quarterbacks that have showed flashes of brilliance this year. So a lot of question marks going into the offseason in what's deeming up to be a very crowded Panthers backfield. And as you take a look, we're going to go over position by position, the key players. And Ben DiNucci, what can you say about him? He was solid. 60% of his passes completed, 2,428 yards. He was averaging about 180 yards a game, 187 yards a game, 1 touchdown and 1 interception a game. So it wasn't like he really was bad for the Panthers. He, would pass for almost 200 yards a game. He'd usually rush for 30, 40, 50 yards a game. He used his legs when he needed to. He was solid for the Panthers. There's no doubt about that. But his final 5 starts of the season, he had only 2 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, and the Panthers really struggled down the stretch, losing their final 3 games. So Pickett comes in, 128 yards and 2 touchdowns in his 1/2 audition. And so you have to wonder, coming into next season, what's going to be the move? McVitie, down to 3rd on the pecking order now. He really just doesn't fit into the Panthers system. He's expected actually to possibly transfer here in the offseason, knowing that he doesn't have much of a future. A couple of interceptions this season, didn't throw a touchdown either. So it looks like Pickett or DiNucci's battle here in spring football, and you have to wonder what Coach Pat Narduzzi and his staff are going to see in these quarterbacks and what they're going to choose to do. A lot is riding on this. And with burning their freshman's redshirt, Kenny Pickett, you have to wonder if it means he's the guy from here on out, because if they were going to burn his redshirt and take that chance, you got to figure they have the faith in him to be successful from here on out. Otherwise, why would you burn that redshirt and waste a year of eligibility for that quarterback? So that could be very telling here going into next season. Running the ball, the Panthers, 2 guys over 700 yards on the season. Darren Hall, 705 yards, 6 touchdowns. Quadri Olson did hit that 1,000-yard mark, 1074 and 10 touchdowns. But as we saw the back half of the season, Darren Hall didn't even feature in a couple games earlier in this year. He had lost his place in the pecking order to Shontez Moss, who we should have more information on in the next episode. But Darren Hall had lost his place, and then the back half of the year, he had a 200-yard performance against Duke. He had a 50-yard performance against Texas A&M. So a couple of big games down the stretch for Darren Hall. 120 yards against UVA. Olson, though, beginning of the year, 155 against Oklahoma State, 133 against Clemson. Those are some great teams. And so you have to wonder again, are the Panthers just going to keep riding them the same way? Just whoever's the hot hand. That's the great part about having 2 good running backs, is you don't really have to put them each on the field at the same time. You can alternate and go from there. Quadri Henderson, 388 yards, was the Panthers' 3rd leading rusher. A couple of touchdowns. Really featured a lot more early in the season. The jet sweeps were continuing to work like they did last season under Nathan Peterman, James Conner, Quadri Henderson. Back half of this year, the Panthers really got away from that and went to a more conventional shotgun-type offense. So you got to wonder what Henderson's role is from here on out. And there's, again, rumors he may go to the NFL draft. DiNucci, for as much as we want to say about him, finished his 4th in the Panthers rushing attack, 292 yards, and he probably would have been 3rd if it weren't for the 25 sacks that he took this year that negatively impact a player's rushing total in the NCAA. So DiNucci, 5 touchdowns on the ground, 300 yards rushing still, and it was probably more close to 400 or so. DiNucci, solid performance from him. Kenny Pickett, of course, we know, had 58 yards on the ground in his lone appearance. Other guys that had played a role for the Panthers rushing the ball. Jordan Whitehead was seen on both sides of the ball, ran for 3 touchdowns, 182 yards on the ground. Panthers didn't use him a ton, but he was a great change of pace, especially, when guys like Hall or Olsen would get tired or you wanted to try and incorporate a different option than Henderson on those sweeps. Whitehead came in, did a fantastic job. Shontez Moss was, featured early on this season, would get 5 to 10 carries a game in the first 3 or 4 games, and then dropped off the face of the earth, became a non-factor, and rumors that he may not be on the team next season. He did finish this year with 145 yards and a touchdown. Some other guys that factored in: Maurice French, Jester Weah, Aaron Matthews on receiver sweeps and things of that nature. The Panthers' utility knife, George Aston, the fullback, had 56 yards, only 1 touchdown this year, where he had 10 last year. So dropped off in terms of his utilization. You'd hope in his senior year next year, maybe the Panthers will feature him a little bit more. Jester Weah, the Panthers' leading receiving option, had 6 touchdowns, 39 catches on the season. So bit of a drop-off from last year. He had 42 or so catches and over 800 receiving yards. His yards per catch was over 20+. Much less, DiNucci was not nearly a threat with the long ball. Heck, the longest pass the Panthers had this season, 71 yards, was actually Weah catching a screen and taking it the length of the field. So the Panthers will miss his speed and his deep threat ability. Chris Clark had a good solid season, 37 catches, 3 touchdowns. Very strong year for the Panthers tight end. And he became a great option for DiNucci and Pickett throughout this season. Quadri Henderson, not as much of a feature catching the ball as he is running it or in the return game, but he did still have 29 catches and a couple of touchdowns. Aaron Matthews will be a big target coming back from the Panthers. You expect him to be kind of the replacement as the big guy for Weah. 23 catches this year. Olsen out of the backfield, 19 grabs. French, 18, as he was used in kind of a slot role and did get some touches on the sweeps as well. Aston, only 14 catches, not a single touchdown through the air. Rafael Araujo-Lopes, 11 catches. Ruben Flowers, 11 catches. So you can see the Panthers did spread the ball out a good amount. They didn't have kind of a go-to receiver. Weah, their top pass catcher, probably averaged 4 catches a game. 4 to 5 because he did miss a couple games towards the end of the season. But other than that, Panthers would have 2-3 catches, but that's mainly because they utilize that rushing attack so much with Hall and Olsen. So you wonder if Pickett becomes a guy. He's got a stronger arm. He's known for being a guy who's fearless in the pocket. Will that passing attack kind of revive under the Panthers? And it will at least give them the option to revive it because DiNucci just doesn't have the arm. He was, comfortable with the ball, was able to get those short yardage routes. But the question for DiNucci is, he doesn't have that deep threat, so the teams could start kind of jamming the box against the Panthers and could try and limit that Panthers rushing attack, and the Panthers didn't have a deep threat to counter it. So you wonder how that's going to factor into the coaching staff's decision. The Panthers will lose some good linemen. Alex Officer is a senior. Brand Hodges is a senior. Brian O'Neill's expected to go to the NFL draft. So the Panthers should lose 3 offensive lineman starters, which will be a shame for them. But defensively, the Panthers are going to return a lot of key contributors. You can see their leading 3 tacklers, Salim Brightwell, Salim Brightmill was a sophomore. Paris Ford, a freshman, 65 tackles. DeMar Hamlin, a sophomore, 65 tackles. Jordan Whitehead, expected to go to the NFL draft, 61 tackles, which was a great return for him considering he missed the first 3 games of the season suspended. Still finished with 61 tackles, a couple of sacks, interception, touchdown, 9 tackles for loss. So good performance from him. Avonte Maddox will be the Panthers' top cover corner. He's expected to go to the NFL. He's a senior, of course. 51 tackles. The Panthers will miss him. But you'd expect the likes of Dane Jackson, who had a very good season coverage-wise. Jackson was honestly a better cover corner than Maddox later on in the season, so he should step up. Hamlin should step up into a starting cover role rather than that nickel role, and players will move up. And another player that you expect to see take on a big role, Kaiser Artis-Scott. A freshman this year, played in the dime role for the Panthers or anytime they had 6 defensive backs on the field. 33 tackles for him, 8 tackles for a loss, had a sack. A great season from Artis-Scott as a freshman, shown a lot of promise, and you expect him to continue to play a big role next season in his sophomore year. Hopefully he doesn't see any kind of sophomore slump. For the Panthers, of course, their leading pass rusher, Dwayne Hendricks, will be returning this year after a 14-sack season. Was very good for the Panthers, led them with 22 tackles for a loss. Unbelievable, is the sack leader actually in the NCAA with 14. A great year, a breakout year for Hendricks after I think he had maybe 1 sack the year previously. So a great season for him, and the Panthers expect to see more. Some other guys that played huge roles as freshmen. This is what's great to see for the Panthers. All these guys we're talking about will be back next year. Jason Jordan, 20 tackles and 3 sacks. Barry Jenkins, 20 tackles and a sack. Those were 2 freshman linebackers for the Panthers that played a key role. Keyshawn Camp, defensive tackle, 5 sacks. Great job for him busting things up the middle. The real disappointment for the Panthers, James Folston started at that right end position. Only 17 tackles. Did have 10 for a loss, which is a good performance, but not a single sack. When your one end, Dwayne Hendricks, has 14 sacks and you can't get a single sack from your starter on the other end, it means that you can expect next year Hendricks is going to get a lot of double teams on him, and they're going to let Folston fend for himself if he's still starting for the Panthers. So the Panthers need to see improvement from their other end position if they want to continually get pressure on the pass or on the opposing passing game. Some other players that could play a big role next year, Dennis Briggs, expected to start at safety if Whitehead goes to the draft. Jay Stalker, again, going to play a big role. Sean Wolfgang, 3 sacks for the freshman. He had 3 more sacks than the starter, James Folston, so you wonder if Wolfgang will have something to say about that starting position this year. He came in and spelled Hendricks last year, but he may make that move to the other side to enable the Panthers to get a more consistent pass rush. So a ton of big players for the Panthers. You can see Hendricks led the way with tackles for a loss, followed by Brightwell. He was very, very solid in a starting role for the Panthers. And there's the sacks like we were talking about. Hendricks had 14, Camp in the middle of the defensive line had 5, but then you go to some reserves, freshmen. Wolfgang had 3, Whitehead had 3. You can see the Panthers had 36 sacks, which was actually top 15 in the country, but the majority of them came from Hendricks. The Panthers want to see some other ends make a big play there. Interceptions-wise, DeMar Hamlin led the way with 5, Maddox and Ford each had 4, Whitehead had 3, Dane Jackson had 2. That's the Panthers' top 5 starting defensive backs, each with a couple of interceptions apiece. So the Panthers will hope to see more of that. Maddox and Whitehead expected to not be here next year, so you hope Artis-Scott and players like that can take a leading role for the Panthers. Of course, we can see the forced fumble errors and so on and so forth. The Panthers defensively, what was funny about them was defensive touchdown-wise, they seemed to get them in bunches. They had 3 in the game against UVA, 3 in the game against UNC, and that was all 6 of their defensive touchdowns. So hopefully they can spread those out a bit next year. Kicking game-wise, of course, the Panthers had a freshman, Jay Bump. Very solid, very consistent. He's just got to work on his leg strength for next year. That's the big key for him. He was 18 of 21, but his long was 46 yards. The Panthers want to be in a position where if they're at, say, the 40-yard line or the 35-yard line, they don't have to go for it or punt from such a short distance. Okay, so that's what J-Bump hopefully will work on for next year. The Panthers will miss Ryan Winslow. 48 touchbacks on 81 kickoffs this season because he had a great strong leg. So a really good kicker for the Panthers, a great punter. They're going to miss him. Averaged 46 yards a punt. Only 36 yards on his net, but that owes more to the Panthers' kind of shoddy coverage on the punt game than anything else. And where the Panthers are really going to miss a playmaker if he does as rumored and goes to the NFL draft is Quadri Henderson. 1,500 yards in the return game, averaged 36 yards a kick return, 2 returns for a touchdown. Unbelievable statistics from him. He had a punt return for a touchdown as well. He wins Returner of the Year for the second straight season. I think between the last 2 seasons, he has 7 returns for touchdowns. 6 or 7 returns for touchdowns, and so many big returns, even on ones he may have gotten caught on. So the Panthers are going to need to find someone in that return game to play a big role for them. So with that said, guys, let us know in the comments what you think about the Panthers' moves for next season. Of course, they have the quarterback controversy. DiNucci, Pickett. Who's the guy they should go with? What should they do about the running game? You'd expect them to do just more of a tandem look. What do the Panthers need to do defensively? Who should be starting on the defensive line? What should be happening in the secondary? What do you expect out of the Panthers as far as improvement going into next season? So as always, guys, we thank you so much for watching this recap. We'll see you in the next episode as we move forward with the offseason. As always, hail to Pitt. Take care. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.